games used to just launch and they might get reviewed and then that was it. But today, a game launches and that's just the very start. From balancing weapons to even rewriting endings, modern games are constantly evolving. And the driving force behind that? Player feedback. So today, we're going to be diving into how player feedback shapes video games after launch, how developers gather that feedback, and what happens when feedback actually changes a video game. So let's jump straight in. Hello everyone, I'm Piers Duplock, producer and video game consultant on over 30 different titles in the video game industry across 15 years. And I've seen a lot of player feedback in that time. And some stuff has been very good, some stuff has been very bad, and there's been some stuff that we've taken action on. So let's talk about that, shall we? So today, in the market we have right now, video games are a living product. Whether it's a single-player RPG or a live service multiplayer shooter, developers are expected to update, to balance, and to tweak their games quite long after release, honestly. Player feedback is no longer optional for video game developers. It's a core part of the launch cycle. And thanks to social media, stuff like Reddit, Discord, platforms like Steam with their forums, the feedback is instant, it's loud, and it's often passionate, shall we say. So where do developers actually gather this feedback? Let's take a look. So we have Steam reviews and forums. That's usually the first place you go, especially as an indie developer. You put your game out on Steam, you're going to check the Steam forums first. There's also Reddit threads. Reddit's a great place to kind of amalgamate all of the information. Check those threads there. Discord servers can be a little bit trickier because you don't know where these Discord servers are a lot of the time, unless you host your own, of course. Social media, very easy to search trends, search your game's title, that kind of thing. YouTube comments, if a reviewer reviews your game, you can just go into the YouTube comments of that review, see what people are thinking. And for the bigger titles, you can get in-game analytics, which actually show you what the players are doing in the video game. You can kind of infer from there through data. The analytics are the biggest thing, I think, for developers, because sometimes a player will tell you if something's wrong. You might get a few comments here and there. Oh, I didn't like this thing. But the data will show it. If 90% of players quit at a certain point of the game, there's something wrong there. But only maybe 3 or 4 people might have taken the time to go, oh, I quit here because I didn't like it. So you get to see the imbalance there. So if you're a player that's dropping some feedback, what can actually change from your feedback? Let's have a look at that, shall we? The main thing in most online video games these days that changes based on player feedback is definitely balance. Because there's no way to balance something internally. If you've just got like 10 people that are playing a multiplayer game, you're not going to get a good sense of balance. Whereas if you throw it out to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, somebody somewhere out there is going to find that overpowered build, that overpowered weapon that absolutely breaks the game, and you can balance it. Bug fixes are still a super prominent thing that gets fixed due to player feedback. If there's a crash, if there's a hang, if there's even a progression blocker or something potentially quite minor. Hey, never saw that before. Let's go and fix that right now. Thank you for your feedback. UI UX improvements are pretty important as well. For instance, if something's not simple to a player that they can't work out themselves, that does need fixing. But to a developer who's worked on this game for 5 years, they just know intrinsically where they're going. So there's definitely a mismatch there. So it's very important to get player feedback on that. Difficulty options is another thing. Developers that play these games every single day as they're testing their features usually get pretty good at it. So they could scale the difficulty a little too high for the average player. And sometimes vice versa. Maybe a developer doesn't want to be challenged at work. So they just put it on the easiest difficulty. So that difficulty balancing does take feedback. Quality of life features is a newer one that we're starting to see now. For instance, if a player is really enjoying playing your game and they've played it for hundreds of hours, perhaps they just want a few tweaks that would make their life a little easier just to get around, see stuff easier, that kind of thing. Most developers are happy to oblige. New content has always been there ever since the advent of DLC. Adding in new content based on player feedback, I think has usually been a good thing. Oh, wouldn't this be a great idea? I'd love to see the quest go in this way, or I'd love to see our hero do this. It's all great feedback that developers should be taking on board. And now there's even story changes as well. Yes, we all think of pretty much one game. I think we think of Mass Effect 3 and the ending to that game and how that was changed based on player feedback. So overall, when we look at the question of what player feedback can change, it's everything. Sometimes it's the small and mundane. Sometimes it's the huge experience for the game. Let's look at a few examples of developers that have done this super well. So the first one that springs to mind for me is No Man's Sky. That game launched really rockily. There was a lot of expectation mismanagement there. And since then, they've just been pumping out update after update based on primarily player feedback of what the players want to see in their video game. All these updates have been free. They've been constantly coming for years now. And here we are with a terrific game. We also have Baldur's Gate 3, which is one of my personal favorite games in the last 10 years or so. It was shaped so heavily, especially that Act 1 that came out in early access. It spent years in early access, and you can really feel that as you play the game. The first act is by far the best because the players were constantly inputting to make it better. Another game that had a rocky launch, Cyberpunk 2077, that had a really rough launch. I remember Sony giving refunds on the game because they weren't happy with it either. But CD Projekt Red heard the players' complaints and they've heard their feedback, and since then have been releasing steady updates to the game. And I think they just announced a new one very, very recently here that is still going to this day. And another one, final one from a smaller developer, I'm going to call that Stardew Valley. That's just one person developing that game. And they've added so many features to that game over the years, including adding the whole multiplayer aspect to it. That wasn't in the original game, but he listened to players, figured it out, and got it in the game. So that's a massive change based on player feedback. That kind of shows that developers listening to players isn't just a PR move. Oh, we're a good guy, we're listening to our players. It actually does have fundamental, long-term, positive impacts for the games, even turning around a couple of examples there from poor launches into very, very good games. But we've had the positive, so we're going to have the negative. Feedback isn't always helpful. There is a dark side to gamer feedback, unfortunately. Review bombing as a protest is particularly nasty. Even nastier is toxic backlash towards game developers themselves. Nobody ever wants to see that. But on the lighter side, there is just conflicting requests. That happens all the time. Some people want to make the game easier. Some people want to make the game harder. Always happens. There'll be feedback that ignores design intent as well. For instance, the design of the game is to set up to be one way. There'll be always some feedback that says, hey, can we go in this other direction? It's like, well, that's not what we intended for our game. It's always going to happen. That happens internally even, in fact. And there's always going to be the aspect of some demands are just going to take way too long, take way too much money. For instance, you want to take a game, hey, add in this feature. If that feature is going to take 6 months, I don't know about that. How are we going to pay for that feature? So while listening to players is essential, not every piece of feedback is essential. The best developers learn to separate the signal from the noise. There's a bit of skill based on balancing your game around player feedback. So I think the developers here that do pick and choose are very, very good at what they do. So it can be tricky because developers have to fix these things that players are rightfully complaining about without breaking anything else. There is technical skill related there. They also have to improve the game without losing their original vision around their creation. There's a lot of design talent there as well. And they have to do it fast, under pressure from fans to perform. That is a production skill right there. So overall, it's like rebuilding a ship whilst you're sailing it. under a storm of Steam reviews. It's a crazy skill to have and one unique to the video games industry. And that's why I called out the developers that I did earlier, because they've done it right. And when you do it right, the player-developer collaboration creates a stronger and better video game. So, love it or hate it, player feedback is shaping the future of video games and giving players more power than ever before. So, have you ever seen a game totally improve after launch based on feedback? Drop that in the comments if you have. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button. Please hit that subscribe button. As a smaller creator, I really, really appreciate it. And there's going to be plenty more. So please keep the comments coming. Keep the questions coming. I do try and build them into every single video that I can. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And thank you so much.